All right, so today we have a PlayStation 4. This one's going to be a little bit different, and I'm going to try to feel this out and see how I want to do this. I don't properly have the right video equipment for it, but I'm hoping to kind of show off a little bit of the work itself. So today we have a PlayStation 4. This comes to us with a busted HDMI port. You can see some of the pins are kind of jacked up in there. So really what this is going to take is we're obviously going to take the motherboard out. We're going to swap out the HDMI port and then put it back together. That's all I'm told that's wrong with it. So, and most likely that is it. Unfortunately, I do quite a few of these. I've done quite a few HDMI port replacements, as well as I do smaller stuff with my microscope, Xbox retimer chips and that kind of stuff. The hardest part is I'm not going to be able to give too deep of a visual of my work because I'm actually working underneath the microscope, and unfortunately I don't have a camera for my microscope. That is something that I'm eventually going to get, and then hopefully you know, our videos benefit from it. So with that said though, let's go ahead and just get this all taken out, and we'll go ahead and get the motherboard out and start work from there. Cool, let's get to it. All right, so we'll get rid of these guys too, and then underneath, sorry, this one, and this one. We'll heat these up, take these pads off, and then we'll get the screws underneath those, and that'll get it going. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so after heating them up, we got this one, this one, this one. These ones, they actually come off real clean if you just get a little bit of warmth on them. I put mine at about 100 degrees, and then just slightly work it off. You can work it off with a just a razor blade. Gets them off real nice. So we'll take off these ones and then get into the main part of it. And this thing is pretty dirty, so we'll do a full clean on it as well. But yeah, this is the main part of it. Yeah, you can definitely see all that dust is all kicked up in there. I'm surprised he wasn't having any issues with the disk drive or anything. But that's something we'll kind of address as we go as well. So. First thing up is the power supply here. You want to work this up. There's two prongs that sit underneath here, so you're lifting it basically up. You also have this wiring harness right here, so you want to disconnect that. But it's easier to get once it's popped up. So there goes, it pops. And then we can pull this out. You want to be really gentle with it because you do not want to tear any of these. And lift it out just like that. These are our two prongs that I was just talking about. From here we can kind of flip it around. This is your antenna. Work this back. We have another wiring harness here. This is for the disk drive. And then you actually have a star screw right underneath here as well to get the disk drive out. Got one more screw right up top here. That's why it's good not to put too much pressure on anything and then just kind of work slowly. And there's the disk drive out. The antenna, kind of work it out here. Move on to the back here. This is your main pressure plate for the heat sink. And we'll remove the final ones here. And this one's super important. A lot of people try to pull it this way, whatever. It actually pops just directly straight up. You want to be super careful with this. This is the first piece that most people break. Just lifts up. So I work on one side and then we'll work on the other side. And lifts just like that. And that's the fan itself. And here's the motherboard here. And here's that HDMI port. So it's actually pulled out on the back. We might he might have done some damage to some of the pads there. So we'll take a look and see. We'll have to get off the HDMI port first, and then from there we'll take a look. It actually looks like one is torn, so we'll do that next and then move on from there. And there's just a quick look inside. So I'm going to get this going first, and then we'll get underneath the microscope and do a full spec. All right, so I just finished up the hardest part of actually doing it. Eventually in the future, I am going to have videos of this this process, because it's really, really ridiculously hard to try to work and get an outside shot rather than having one mounted on my microscope. But I'll walk you through basically what I did. So took low melt solder and I added it to each one of the 4 standoffs on the bottom side of the board. Then I added low melt solder to each one of the pins inside the connector that connects it to the motherboard. And that basically will let it come free from the pads without having to pull them up. Luckily, none of the pads were actually pulled, so that's good news for the customer, because then I don't have to rerun any lines or anything. So it's a lot less expensive. But I got off. I then used my heat gun, heated it up, and then just pulled the HDMI port right off of it. I went ahead and cleaned up everything. So I'm just gonna give you a shot of what it looks like without the port on and nice and cleaned up. All right, and here's a look at the port itself now. Let's see if I can get focus there. So as you can see, all the standoff holes are all cleaned out. I also have all the pads. They're all cleaned off. I'm just going to go ahead and first tin those bad boys up, and then we're going to put in the new HDMI port and then solder it back onto the board there. So I'll go ahead and do that and then just give you a final visual of what it looks like when it's done. All right, so I went ahead and installed the new HDMI port onto the motherboard there. It's pretty simple because everything got cleaned out really nicely. Dropped it into place, added some solder to all the pads, just a huge amount to the pins and the pads on there, and then I flipped over the board, and then I actually soldered in the main standoffs. And then once I did that, then I went ahead, flipped the board back over, cleaned off all the pins and made sure none of them were touching, added the adequate amount of solder to them, and then let it cool off. And then from there, I went ahead with my microscope and then just went through and made sure that each pin was soldered correctly. And then some of the pads I just wanted to double check. I also did a continuity check. I don't usually do that. I just, the way that some of the light reflected off of it, I was thinking that some of the solder might have bridged, but it didn't. So yeah, so everything's back into place. I'm gonna go ahead and just give you just a view of it, the best view that I can possibly give you. All right, and here is the port. There it is. There's the port all soldered in. Everything looks nice. All the pads look good. Luckily, none of them were pulled. If you've ever worked with these before, sometimes if the pads pull up, then you got to run jumper wires and find the exact points of where they go to. So yeah, and then obviously it's a brand new port, so he's not going to have any issue with that. Other than that, I'm going to clean up the motherboard. We'll get the whole system cleaned out and we'll get it all back together and we'll power it up and just make sure everything is good. Cool. Awesome. Let's get to it. All right, so everything's put back together. We're gonna go ahead and just power on and just make sure the HDMI is all tested out before we put on the back screws there. Nothing's worse than finishing up a console, putting it all back together and realizing something's wrong with it. All right, and looks like we got a PlayStation logo, which is good news. It means our HDMI port is working properly. And here we go. Into the main menu. Sweet. Awesome. Everything works. I believe we have a disc inside, so let's just check that real quick. Sounds normal. Awesome. Perfect. So that wasn't too hard of a repair to do. Swapping out the HDMI port doesn't take too much. You really just want to spend your time, if you're doing it, spend your time really coating all the pins and all the solder joints down on the component itself in low melt solder, excuse me. Because once you start heating it up, if you coat it perfectly in low melt solder, that component's just going to pull right up off the board. If you have trouble with that and you're trying to rush through it and you heat it and you're pulling on it too much, you're going to end up pulling up some of those pads, and then you're going to have to run jumper wires to make those connections back. And that really takes your small amount of time that it's going to take to repair it up to who knows how long to get it all set back into place. But yeah. I'm really hoping in the future that I am going to get my camera for my microscope, so in my future videos I'll be able to do a little bit more play-by-play, especially when you're getting down there. It's just so hard trying to get the right angle from a offset camera and my microscope while trying to hover the board and get it perfectly done. And obviously I want to do the best for my customers, so I just want to get that done and then show it off later. But yeah, check out any of my other repair videos if you haven't. Subscribe if you haven't already, and yeah, we'll catch you guys later on another Fix It Friday, and yeah, we'll see you later.